Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Off-Farm Income Podcast. Thank you very much for joining us here on our YouTube channel for episode number 798. Well, just the other day, I was talking to Autumn, my wife, about the coronavirus and the origins of how all this started over in China. And there's videos out there on YouTube. A lot of you have probably seen them. They're calling them wet markets. I'm not sure why they call them wet markets, but essentially they are these markets where in Asia people go and they buy food, right? And there's just all manner of wildlife. There's all manner of domestic animal. There's animals, pets, dogs and cats, and they're alive. A lot of them are alive there at the wet market, and they're getting killed and slaughtered and butchered and taken home to consume right there, all in one place. No biosecurity measures at all. Now, admittedly, the video that I watched, I believe somebody had falsely put it up and said that it was from the Wuhan province, but it was actually from Thailand. But from what I understand or what I've been able to gather is that the video I was watching is representative of what's going on or what was going on in these wet markets in China. And it's pretty amazing to watch if you go through the video that I was watching, and obviously the video wasn't doctored. It was a real market somewhere, but I think it was in Thailand. There's cages full of cats. There's dogs that are tied up, and when somebody comes and buys one, they go ahead and they slaughter it right there and they butcher it. And there's no biosecurity. I couldn't see any efforts for cleanliness. I couldn't see any of that. And they had cats on sticks. They had bats on sticks. They had, in this one, there was big chunks of snake. You're probably not finding that in China. That's probably more of a tropical thing. But there was every manner of wildlife being sold and being found and being killed and then being brought and being sold in these markets. And that's interesting. So as I was watching this and I showed it to Autumn, I said, I think the one positive we're going to have out of this coronavirus thing, or one of the positives we're going to have out of this, is that people are going to look at our American system of agriculture, and especially if you're an intellectually honest animal rights person, you're going to look at our American system of agriculture and you're going to go, well, this is the best way that we can do this. Because if you look at what was being sold in these wet markets, and in this video I watched, they show a guy pulling a kitten out of a cage and kind of holding its head down on the cage and getting ready to club it, and they didn't show it, but he's getting ready to club it and kill it as the guy with the camera is walking past, and he kind of turns away before the guy does it. If you're an animal rights person, you're looking what's going on in these wet. Over there, at least this is the way it appeared, that anything that's not human, that is on four legs or even two legs, walking around, man, it is getting killed, it's getting slaughtered, and it's getting consumed. There's just everything over there is just getting eaten. And so if you look at what we do here in the United States, you look at feedlots, you look at the way we raise pigs in confinement, in farrowing barns and things like that. You look at the way we raise chickens, well, all of a sudden you get a whole new perspective, right? You get a whole new perspective. You look at what we do and the way we process food and the regulations we have on processing food, and then what gets done with the food to ensure biosecurity after the food, after the animal has been slaughtered, after it's been butchered, and before it goes on to the consumer. You look at all the steps we take, all the monitoring, and all of that, and in my mind, as I'm talking to Autumn, I'm sitting there and I'm going, well, finally, people are going to look at what we do in America because they're getting exposed to what's going on over in places like Asia, and they're going to go, oh boy, what options do we have? I would much rather have wildlife flourishing and not being all brought together like this. I would much rather have that in our American system of agriculture than I would have this system where everything's being brought together. There's no regulation for cleanliness, for biosecurity, any of that, and any walk of animals being brought in here. I like what we're doing better. So I assumed that's what people would do. I should have known. That that could never be true. Unfortunately, it just appears to be something that could never be true. That if you've got your mind made up, that the confinement, the raising, the domestication of livestock, and then the consumption of animals for all the things that they provide, if you've got your mind made up that that's wrong or that it's immoral or something like that, then there's just absolutely no amount of convincing that can take place to make you go, okay, not only is it okay in circumstances, but we're doing it well here in the United States. It just can't be done. And it's interesting. So we've got Hattie, our daughter's at home. Of course, probably most, honestly, I don't know. There's probably schools still in the United States somewhere that are in session. There's places where that's probably appropriate. But in Idaho now, none of them. So Hattie's been at home. I think her and Autumn have been at home for 4 weeks now. And so we started, her spring break ended about 10 days ago, her technical spring break. So we decided, well, we're gonna get with it, and you're gonna start getting homeschooled until your school gets online with online education. We're coming up with a curriculum for you. So I've always kept my first year, my Animal Science 101 textbook back from 1991, my goodness, 1991. I still have that textbook. I've always enjoyed that textbook. This is the textbook I would drive around with, and I would try and identify breeds of cattle by driving around to the different ranches where I grew up, looking at cattle and then looking at the pictures in the book. This is what I used to do for fun. So anyway, I've always kept that textbook. So I've cracked that textbook, and I've been reading through it again, and then coming up with a pre-test and then a post-test for Hattie every day, and teaching her animal science, teaching her more about the livestock industry, teaching her about the reasons that we use livestock. And actually, the fact, because I'm talking to you about this article I found today, and what I went through this morning, really fortuitous timing in terms of this article that I came across. So as I was reading through and kind of rereading what I read, 25 years ago, or wait, almost 30 years ago, my goodness. What I read through back then, as I was reading through that and getting reminded of how amazing agriculture is in the United States, it was really cool. So, for example, people live in areas, and the United States is not like this, but parts of Asia, parts of Africa, parts of Australia, parts of South America, people live in areas where they can't cultivate the ground. They cannot farm. There's no way they're going to be able to farm vegetables, fruits, or crops like grain. It's not going to happen. But they can run goats, they can run cattle, they can run horses, and those animals can survive out there, and they can run sheep, and then those animals can turn what the environment is producing out there into a consumable food product for those people. And those animals are returning about 80% of what they consume back to the land through manure. 80%. So they're only using 20% of what is there. And it creates a system that allows people to survive in those areas, to live in those areas. It's amazing. And then if you look at all of the byproducts that comes out of cattle, of sheep, of goats, of whatever it may be, and what we use them for, everything, ice cream, paintbrushes. I mean, just the list goes on and on and on. It was really amazing to see that, and it was a very, very good reminder for me to see that. And there's something that I've always wanted to do an interview about. As a matter of fact, I have a book that I'm reading, and I intend to interview the author about this. But it's something I've always wanted to talk about because, and this is not a religious show, and I'm not an overly religious person, but I'm definitely a believer in God. And I go to a Lutheran church, so I'm Christian. And, that's where I believe authority comes from. Certainly the authority for the United States Constitution and the Bill of Rights, right? The rights given to us by God they come before government. And that's everything that the government is based on, right? That certainly is the foundation for our country. And then when it comes to whether or not it's moral to consume animals, well, if you don't look at that authority that's given in the Bible, well then if you say it's wrong or if you say it's right, if you don't believe that authority comes from God, well then it's just kind of your opinion, right? And so if it's just your opinion, well then why do I have to listen to your opinion? So for me, whenever I have heard arguments against the use of animals in agriculture, I've always turned back to the Bible, read the Bible, and went, well, we're given the charge, the stewardship over all of nature's animals here. And certainly I don't think we should be abusive. We shouldn't be frivolous. But everything that I believe in that gives the world authority, gives us moral direction, this whole book is packed full of examples of using animals for meat consumption, for other consumption, animal skins, for sacrifices, all this type of stuff, right? So that's what I think. And then if you don't have that authority and you don't believe in any of that, because if you believe in that, then you're going to read the book and you're going to go, okay, use of animals is all right. So if you don't believe in that, well, then that's just your opinion. And what is your opinion based on? So I'm kind of going down this road because that's where my belief in this all comes from. And so as I'm going through this list with Hattie and I'm thinking about the amazing things that ruminants can do, ruminants in particular, for people to let them inhabit certain parts of the earth that otherwise they couldn't have food. They couldn't grow food in. They couldn't survive in. It would be too cold. There'd be no food. It's amazing to me. It really feels like a gift from God. It's amazing to me, the rumen digestive system, or the ruminant digestive system. Well, then I come back to our current situation with the coronavirus and my thoughts that, man, this is really going to bring people around. People are going to see how it's done elsewhere, and they are really going to be appreciative of our system of agriculture here in America. And so this morning, I got up and I went to Google, typed in farming, and clicked on news stories just to see what was out there. And the first story I came across, the title is from The Hill. I'm not familiar with this publication, but the title is "Reducing Pandemic Risk Begins with Ending Factory Farming." And I went, well, hold on a minute. What is it that I don't know? Well, is there something I don't know here? And then there's a picture of cattle being moved through an alleyway on the top of the article. I have no idea if this is a feedlot or not, but there's a picture of cattle being moved through an alleyway. So I'm going to read this article to you really quick. It says, if these first months of COVID-19 are teaching us anything, it's what we value most and truly can't live without: our health. Like many Americans, I'm keeping watch over my 3 children who are now home from school for their and the community's safety. I'm checking on my parents, one of whom has a heart condition, and my grandmother, who is completely shut inside her assisted living facility and denied any visits. I know what my top priority is: get all my loved ones out of this crisis well. Already, too many people have lost their jobs and even their freedoms. Some have lost loved ones. Our economy has all but come to a halt. While some of these losses can be recovered, others, the hundreds and thousands of lives lost, cannot. Many of us can't think beyond the gravity of the moment. But for me, the roots of this crisis come briefly into focus, and it is in these times that I am reminded our response to this pandemic will determine our future. This is not a drill. This pandemic is a very real manifestation of our unhealthy relationship to animals. Next paragraph. In response to COVID-19, the Chinese government banned consumption of wildlife. But what if that had already been banned? Now is the time for us to survey the landscape, identify existing dangers, and take action against them. When it comes to the potential risks that may lead to pandemics, such as this novel coronavirus, global leaders and scientists should consider the repercussions of factory farming. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, An estimated 3 out of 4 new or emerging infectious diseases originate in animals, and 3 out of 5 infectious diseases are spread by animals. The World Health Organization states that the greatest risk for zoonotic disease transmission occurs at the human-animal interface through direct or indirect human exposure to animals, their products, examples are meat, milk, and eggs, and or their environments. When COVID-19 first broke out in the Wuhan province in China, the CDC warned travelers to avoid animals, alive or dead, animal markets, and products that come from animals. Of course, the rest of the world also raises animals for their meat and byproducts, and like the CDC, the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations has tied people's health to the animals they eat. Quote, livestock health is the weakest link in our global health chain. It doesn't take an epidemiologist to understand why the health of livestock and, in turn, our own are in peril. The overwhelming majority of farmed animals are kept in dark, unsanitary, overcrowded factory farms, which stresses their immune systems. Worse, they're bred primarily for rapid growth and maximum output, not robustness, and their genetic similarity makes them especially likely to transmit disease to one another. Animal after animal, they are churned through the system, often on the same dirty floors, the same stagnant trucks, and the same slaughter lines. This system puts everyone's health at risk. Animal agriculture is ripe for infectious pathogens to jump from animals to humans. This we know. Recent global health threats such as H1N1, the swine flu, Nipah virus infection, and HPAI, highly pathogenic avian influenza, are all linked to farmed animals. In the late 1990s, Nipah virus, which causes respiratory and neurological illness in both pigs and humans, emerged in peninsular Malaysia from pig farms. The 2006 HPAI outbreak began in Chinese poultry farms, and in 2009, swine flu erupted in Mexico, where it evolved and circulated among farmed pigs before crossing to humans. Origins in animal farming aren't all that these illnesses have in common. Each has killed people, in some cases millions, and in others more than half of those stricken. With billions of animals are pushed through the I think this is a typo, but I'll read it as it's written. With billions of animals are pushed through the food system annually, it seems a matter of when, not if, a potentially devastating microbe makes the leap, unless we change our course. It's time we reevaluate our relationship to animals and realize its connection to our own health. We must see factory farming for what it is, perhaps the most likely cause of the next deadly pandemic. Once we do, we can unite, commit, and build a path to a better food system for all, one that puts our health and that of our loved ones above all else. And then it goes on to talk about the author. It says, Leah Garces, Garces, is the president of Mercy for Animals and author of, quote, Grilled, Turning Adversaries into Allies to Change the Chicken Industry, end quote. It says she lives in Decatur, Georgia. Okay. So that is the article right there. Hey, everybody. Just a quick word about our sponsors before I come back and finish off talking about this article. Of course, Lacrosse boots. You can find them at lacrossefootwear.com. Hey, done right since 1897, Lacrosse Footwear has been making quality boots for hunting, working, and tending the land for over a century. We always wear the Alpha Range right here on our farm. We hope you're putting Lacrosse boots on your feet on your farm as well. You can find them at lacrossefootwear.com. And, of course, Powder River Livestock Handling Equipment. Well, you can find them over at powderriver.com. And I'll tell you what, for the best in large livestock handling equipment to reduce injury, reduce stress, to make it as safe as possible to work with this large livestock, you want Powder River on your farm. I've got some friends, they put a picture up on Facebook just yesterday, and they had a cheap panel on their farm that one of their bulls had basically turned into a taco shell. It just pushed that thing until it just caved right in. And I did not respond because I'm sure it's the last thing they wanted to hear, but they needed a Powder River panel. There's no question. You could see where the bull got his head between the rails, was able to lift it up and push and just put those shoulders right against those rails on that cheaper panel, and it just bent it all around him, just like a shield of armor. Not with a Powder River panel. It all starts with the design. That bull could have never got his head between the rails to be able to do that, and those things are built so stout, he would not have bent it like that either. So make sure you're checking out Powder River. You can find them at powderriver.com. All right, let's jump back in. All right, so I want to admit a couple things here about this article. First and foremost, in terms of what livestock farming looks like in China or in Mexico or in any of these other places that the author mentioned, I truly don't know. And so I'm not here to be an advocate for or to defend their livestock handling practices, their farming of livestock practices in those countries, because I'm ignorant. I don't know enough about that. But I got the distinct feeling that this author was not talking just about those countries. I definitely got the distinct feeling that the United States was included in her description. Why? Because as I mentioned at the beginning, at the top of this article, there's a photograph of cattle, good-looking steers, being moved down a chute. This is taken from directly above. There's a guy down there working in the chute. He's got a cowboy hat on, and it looks like he's got a little rattler to help move cattle. One of those rattlers that are made by Hot Shot, where you can rattle it and kind of get them to move you the way you want them to go. And I'll tell you, I don't think that this is in China, and I guess it could be in Mexico. I don't think it is. It looks like an American operation or an Australian operation or something like that to me. And so, I think if this author was going to be intellectually honest, that she would distinguish where she is talking about. Is she including the United States, or is she just talking about dealing with quote-unquote factory farming in countries like China, Mexico, and these other countries that she expressly named? Because to me, there's a distinct implication here that she's not talking just about those other countries, that she's lumping in the United States. The photograph adds to that. In her second paragraph, she says, like many Americans. So she's obviously an American, and expressing freedom of speech. I totally support that. But there's a couple things that came up in here I wanted to point out because they were just glaring to me. And to be honest with you, I try and not speak as an authority on things that I don't know anything about. Now, is this individual doing this? It seems like it to me, unless she left out an important detail and she's exempting the United States. She's exempting Australia. She's exempting Canada. The European Union. If she's not exempting those countries from this article, well then yes, I think that she's speaking as an authority without having all of the knowledge. So the first quote that I jotted down here is, quote, "This pandemic is a very real manifestation of our unhealthy relationship to animals." Now, do we consume wildlife in the United States? Because she expressly talks about China banning the consumption of wildlife. Well, yes, we do. And it's regulated. You need a hunting license. Right now in Idaho, they're worried about, we don't have any cases of it in Idaho yet, but they're worried about chronic wasting disease in deer. And so there's regulations right now in Idaho to protect the wildlife in Idaho and protect people from the consumption of tainted wildlife in Idaho. So in the United States, we do consume wildlife, but it's got oversight, right? And we've got people they're out there and they're testing for disease and they're monitoring all of this. It's a lot different than China, right? I mean, you can't lump these two things together. It can't be done. And then by the way, we're talking about factory farming here, but clearly, these wet markets reflect, in no way do they reflect what we do in the United States. It doesn't even come close to what we do in the United States when it comes to the raising or the consumption or the slaughter of livestock. It doesn't even come close. Yet by her omission, she's conflating the two different practices. So to sit there and say the pandemic is a very real manifestation of our unhealthy relationship to animals, well, let me say something really quick. The relationship with animals in the United States is so different than the relationship with animals than we're seeing in China or in Southeast Asia that it's laughable to conflate these two things. Are you kidding me right now? You go out, you find me somebody in the U.S. who wants to have a system like those wet markets in China or in Thailand or wherever it may be. You find me one person who goes, all this regulation's a real bummer. Let's just bring in a bunch of bats and squirrels and dogs and cats and ducks and geese and deer and monkeys and snakes and butcher them all in one place, have them all in one spot, and we'll just butcher them on the spot. People can go home and eat them right now. Name me one person who wants that. It's ridiculous to suggest that. So just the premise starting out on this deal is if you want to define the unhealthy relationship, the first thing you've got to do is go, the way these people in the United States treat livestock and butcher livestock and regulate the butcher and slaughter of livestock for the health of their citizens and everybody they export to, by the way, is way different than what we're looking at over here. Are you kidding me right now? It's just nuts to think about this. Okay, the next quote. She says, let me make sure. Okay, Leah, yeah, okay, so it's a she. So she says, quote, in response to COVID-19, the Chinese government banned consumption of wildlife, but what if that had already been banned? Yeah, you're right. What if this was all the result of a giant nuclear underground experiment? What if aliens came down and injected animals? What's what if? Why are we what ifing this? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me right now? What if they'd already been banned? I can tell you what if. What if they'd already been banned? A lot of people would be at work right now, and my wife and my daughter would not be working from home because we wouldn't be having a pandemic with this COVID-19. Are you kidding me right now? Of course this is a different thing. What if that had already been banned? Your what ifs are crazy. We've had this system of agriculture going on for years now. And have things happened? Of course they have. There's nothing you can do that leads to progress in this entire world that's 100% safe. It can't be done. And the moment we start trying to live so that there's never any risk involved anywhere is the moment we become worthless. We become absolutely worthless. And those of us in agriculture, of course we know that. I mean, farming is one of the most dangerous jobs out there. Of course we know that. Thank goodness for those of us who are still willing to take a risk in what we do for a living. Are you kidding me? It makes a big difference. That's how progress is made. That's how we get a better society. So this big what if they'd already banned it? Well, you can what if any scenario that you want to come up with here. It's crazy to ask this question. Factory farming in the way that this person is defining it has been going on for decades. Decades. We've never shut the world down from a pandemic like we just did. Never. Now, the Spanish influenza, 1917, 1918, back then, people stayed in. But we've never done to an economy, a worldwide economy, what we have just done. Yet we've had factory farming for decades, the way she's defining it. Decades. So she doesn't really need to what if this, does she? Because you don't need to ban the consumption of wildlife to then find out if a pandemic can arise from factory farming. All you have to do is have factory farming. Matter of fact, I would make the argument that the fact that the consumption of wildlife has been done in this manner and legal in China for this long, in conjunction with what she's defining as factory farming, would enhance the chances of a pandemic, a worldwide pandemic starting through a factory farming operation. Yet, where's the evidence? When has that happened? So my answer to her is, what if this had already been banned? Is, well, that'd be one less risk factor for what you're talking about. The chances of what you're talking about happening would actually be diminished if these practices with wildlife were not going on already. All right, next quote. The overwhelming majority of farms, I'm going to start that over. The overwhelming majority of farmed animals are kept in dark, unsanitary, overcrowded factory farms. End quote. I cannot speak to Mexico. I cannot speak to China. I cannot speak to virtually anywhere else. But I can speak to the United States. Are you kidding me right now? You've got to be kidding me right now. Why? Anybody who would sit down and think critically about this statement would not write it, because it doesn't make sense on its face. Now, let's take everything else away from this. Let's take away regulation. Let's take away all of that, and let's just think about the farmer. Let's take pork producers. Pork producers in Iowa, Nebraska, all up through the grain belt there. They go out and they sink a ton of capital. Matter of fact, they might go into debt to get the capital to build these pig barns and to develop this pig business. Do you think, after doing all of that, that they are going to haphazardly run these operations so that a disease, it doesn't need to be a pandemic, it can just be a disease of swine, it could just be swine flu or some other disease, can come in and absolutely decimate their business, cause them to go bankrupt? Do you think that's in their best interest? And if you don't think that's in their best interest, then why do you think somebody would behave in that manner? Why do you think somebody would do that? Why do you think somebody would, to quote you, keep their animals in dark, unsanitary, and overcrowded conditions? Why? Because she goes on to talk about how that stresses the immune system, and I think that's true. I've worked in feedlots, and yeah, we ride pins every day, and we pull animals out, and we treat them for pink eye, for pneumonia, for whatever it may be, because that's true. Being confined and pushed together like that and on feed does stress the immune system. There's no question about that. That does happen. Stress in humans and in animals, it puts a stressor and it weakens the immune system. There's no question. That part's true. So why would a farmer purposely adopt a practice that would ruin them? It makes zero sense. Zero sense. So if you're intellectually honest, you've got to, and you write this paragraph, this quote, you've got to ask yourself, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. And by the way, as a former detective, a real detective, my next question would be, that doesn't make any sense. I need to do some more research to figure out why this doesn't make sense to me. Until this makes sense to me, I'm not writing this, I'm not putting that out. But this is put out in this article. Now, this is just taking the logic. Now let's expand out from the logic. What about regulation? What about regulation? What about the fact that light is good for livestock? You've got sows in a farrowing barn, right? I mean, light can be good. Airflow is good. Okay, you want airflow. What about all the biosecurity measures? Why would somebody, and any of you who have ever stepped onto a chicken farm or a pig farm, you know this is true. There are barns, you go into a pig farm, there are barns where the farmer's going to say, you're not going anywhere near that barn. Why? Because they don't want you bringing in germs or bacteria that's going to cause illness in their pigs. And by the way, we're not even talking about the death of the pigs. The margins are so slim in the hog business that all they need is some sort of a disease that come in that slows down the growth of those pigs, that makes them be on feed longer to reach that 225 or 275 pound finishing weight. And that'll ruin them. They don't even need pigs to be dropping dead. They just need them slowed down. And that's true on a feedlot. That's true in a chicken house. So if you've ever done any research, you've ever gone onto a confinement operation where there's all these biosecurity measures, right? You can't go near this barn. Or if you've been around pigs in the last week, you can't even come on the farm. Or, for example, some of the poultry farms I've gone to, man, you've got to put on booties. You've got to dip your feet into a disinfectant solution before you walk into a barn or something like that. I mean, this is serious, serious stuff. Serious stuff. So why would we go to all that effort for biosecurity for our livestock if we're keeping them in dark, unsanitary, and overcrowded factory farms? Now look, you may not agree with confinement feed operations, and you can make arguments about why you disagree, but let's not conflate the facts. Let's not conflate the fact of however this is being done in China or Mexico or whatever that may be with how it's being done in the United States. You can't use a term like factory farming, however you define it, and apply it to every different farming operation in this world. They are vastly different. Are you joking? Okay, next quote. Animal after animal, they are churned through the system, often on the same dirty floors, the same stagnant trucks, and same slaughter lines. End quote. Obviously, this person has not gone to the trouble of going onto YouTube or any place like that and just typing in a simple search term. Like, for example, washing a livestock trailer. Right? I mean, do you know that dirty job? People going into those trailers that haul cattle, that haul sheep, that haul goats, haul pigs, going in there with high-pressure hoses and cleaning those things out. I mean, I know you in this audience do, because I know a lot of you drive those animals, and you do that. And you do the same with your stock trailers. Are you kidding me right now? This is all out there. This is available. You can go out and you can see what biosecurity cleanliness measures are taken, some of which are required by people who ship livestock. I mean, this Dungeness, oh man, this horrible view this person paints is completely unfair. She talks about the same dirty floors. Really? Have you ever been in a pig barn? Not only have you gone through multiple biosecurity measures, but those places are clean. I mean, my goodness, look at the technology that goes into the floors and the airflow and the heating and the washing and the rinsing and the draining and all of that into dairy barns, into pig barns. Are you kidding me right now? All you have to do is just do a little bit of research and be a little bit open-minded and be just more interested in the truth than you are in the agenda, and you can find all of this out. And by the way, are there places in our country where people treat their livestock like crap? Absolutely there are. 100% there are. Are there barns in our country that people need to get their act together and get corrected? Absolutely there are. And I think under normal circumstances we would just say let the free market figure it out, right? They're going to go broke because they're not going to make any money on their animals. But there are animals involved, and we care about these animals. And again, going back to what I said about the authority, we're given the stewardship over these animals, so we want them to be treated well. So we can't just wait for the free market to correct those things. We sometimes need to intervene. So I'm not going to sit here and be intellectually dishonest and say that this has never happened, but to paint, quote-unquote, factory farming with this broad brush is so unfair it's laughable. I mean, we are talking about 1%, probably less than 1% of farming operations that practice confined animal feeding that are going to be able to be described in the manner she's describing factory farming in the United States, in Canada, in Australia, in the European Union. I mean, that is just a joke. It's just a crazy, crazy joke. By the way, again, our system is set up in the United States and through all these other countries I've mentioned here that where I say it's a joke, where if we get an outbreak of something, they can trace it right back to that producer. Right back to that producer. We are working extremely hard for biosecurity because we have the knowledge of how important animal protein is, of the fact that we're omnivorous as human beings, and we need that animal protein, and of what an amazing thing a ruminant digestive system is. We understand that. And so we are doing everything we can to ensure that we can continue to fulfill the demand for this food that exists and do it in as safe a way as possible. And by the way, can you imagine being the farmer where they show up at your door and say, we've had an outbreak of E. coli, we've had an outbreak of swine flu, or whatever it may be, and we've traced it back to your farm, it came from your place. You don't want to be that farmer. In the United States, you get held accountable. You do not want to be that farmer. There is so much incentive in our country to farm in a confined animal feeding situation in a manner that is clean, it is responsible, it is trackable and traceable. It is the complete opposite of what this author is describing. That it's laughable that this could be written. There should be, in this article, there should be a footnote saying everything I'm writing here applies only to these countries. China, Mexico, wherever. And I know there's a lot of American influence in agriculture in Mexico, and I know where Mexico's market is. That's the United States. I'm highly suspicious of what she's saying about Mexico as well, or the implication here of Mexico, just because if Mexico starts producing a dangerous product, they're not going to be able to sell it because we're their consumer. So I'm suspicious of that as well. But take that, just put that aside. There should be something in this article that distinguishes, hey, I researched this and we've almost wiped out these practices in the world. Hooray for us. We've almost wiped them out. But in China, this is still going on. I don't think anyone, and me included, would argue that if this title of this article said, Reducing Pandemic Risk Begins with Ending Factory Farming in China, and maybe in China in the manner they're currently doing it, I'd probably be right on board with this article. But are you kidding me right now? So anyway, everybody, this morning I knew I wanted to do an episode for you, and I went out looking for a topic. What could I talk about with you guys today? I mean, I love to talk ag and to get into this, and this is the first thing that popped up, and I'm like, what? We're taking, and I forget who it was that said never waste. I think it was Rahm Emanuel who said never waste a crisis or something like that, like always take advantage of a crisis when it comes about. And we got this worldwide pandemic, hundreds of thousands of people, or maybe are we over 1 million? Maybe we're over 1 million infected now. Hundreds of thousands of people have died. Maybe that's what I'm going for. I don't know. And let's not waste this pandemic by missing the opportunity to bash a certain practice of agriculture. I don't like that. Well, anyway, everybody, it's not really how I normally do this show, but I was compelled to today. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'd love to hear your comments on this. Absolutely. And as always, enjoy your journey to the ultimate lifestyle business, agriculture.